I hope to convince you that ordinary field corn is fit for humans to eat. We will do this by showing you samples of various kinds and grinds of corn with wheat flour for comparison, shelling some ear corn, grinding our corn right before your eyes, baking with the corn, and finally by eating some of the baked goods we made while showing you how corn-rich scones look and taste in comparison with wheat-rich scones. Here are 6 samples of ground grain. 5 are of corn that is ground to various degrees, and 1 is a sample of bleached white flour for comparison. Except for our own corn flour, all the other samples are commercial products which have had the germ removed so they will keep without refrigeration. Here's a really coarse grind. They must have left the hulls on this one. The average particle size is between 50 and 70 thousandths of an inch. Here's the finest corn grind that I have found so far. The hulls have been removed before grinding. I don't know where the bright yellow color came from. Did they add coloring? The average particle size is 10 to 20 thousandths of an inch. Here's an in-between grind, similar to what we will be demonstrating. The average particle size is 10 to 40 thousandths of an inch, but there's more in the less than 20 thousandths of an inch particle size than our own corn has. This Quaker Oats cornmeal is what most people would use to make the cornbread most folks identify with ground corn. The average particle size is 15 to 30 thousandths of an inch. Here's our own field corn flour. I don't know what kind of corn was used to produce the other corn flours or meals, but we use the commercial field corn grown in this area that is called yellow Dent corn. It's the same product that is widely used for animal feed and for ethanol production. For our use, we leave the hulls on and the germ intact when we grind, so we need to refrigerate or freeze our product to maintain freshness. Or we can simply store the shelled corn in a dry place and grind it as we need it, as you would with coffee beans. The average particle size is 10 to 40 thousandths. And finally, here's a sample of the bleached white, no-germ wheat flour that we buy at the grocery store. It's here to give you a comparison for texture or fineness of grind and color. The average particle size is 2 to 6 thousandths of an inch. Lastly, here is a single kernel of the field corn we grind, broken in half so you can see what's inside. Notice how white the center is. So much for the samples. Now it's on to shelling, grinding, baking, and eating our own fit-for-humans-to-eat field corn. Most people think that this corn, which is the stuff that we grow here in Wisconsin and many other places around the world, is for animal feed only. This is yellow Dent corn. I'm sure it's got a much more detailed scientific name, but this is the kind of corn that we've been processing and eating and treating it sort of like wheat flour, except instead of using yeast to make our bakery goods rise, we use baking powder. So at any rate, I'm going to just shell some corn here just to show you how it comes off the cob. Remember, this comes off of those tall plants that we see growing around the countryside in big rows and turning light tan colored in the fall. This has been in a farmer's field, an Amish farmer's field, up until about a month or 6 weeks ago, and here it is March. So it was there all winter, and they shocked it up and husked it by hand and threw it in their corn crib, and so it's dry, and I'm just going to shell a little bit of it just to show you how that's done. And it looks like it probably would take me about 3 to 4 minutes to get 600 kernels or 500 or 600 kernels off of one decent sized ear. There, and that's what there is to shelling corn. And then of course, if that's what you were doing, this cob could certainly be burned in the stove. It'd make a good hot fast fire in the kitchen range too. Okay, we're gonna grind some corn, some yellow dent corn, into a flour, not a meal. This will be a flour that'll be approximately as fine as wheat flour. So here's my setup, and now I'll get my head out of the way and we'll talk about it and grind some corn. Here's the corn. There's about 3 pounds of it in here. We're going to grind a couple of cups. This is a grinder that we've had for many years. It's for grinding up grains, small grains and stuff. We used to make our own bread and so on. It has a hand crank normally, which is here, but I've replaced it with this pulley and an old treadmill motor, and with a controller that's hiding over here and a speed control pot that's hiding over there, because it's a lot of work to grind the corn. So I'm going to do a kind of a triple grind here. First I'll do a coarse grind. We'll look at the result, do a second grind, look at the result, and a final grind. So this has steel burrs and stones, you might call them, but they're steel. So I'm going to loosen it up a little bit, about a quarter turn, and we'll see what happens. This is a ½ cup container here. That's probably a little too tight. There. It's about 3/4 of a turn. This is my third ½ cup. Just a little looser here. Okay, so that's the first grind. Now the big deal here, I hope the camera shows this and I get it in the view right, is that we have here on the top, it's a pretty light, fluffy material, but over here on the sides, you can see actual particles of the corn yet and chunks of the husk, which I'm leaving on now. I'm not removing the husks ahead of time. But here it's light and fluffy, but you see, again, there's quite a bit of the yellow husk left. So now we're going to grind that again. Okay, so now I've simply put the meal into another container, and we'll run it through again. We'll tighten up the stones here, or the burrs, I guess they're called. Okay, this is the second grind, and one of the things you might notice is a term they call angle of repose. Notice that the corn is stacked up higher. That kind of would imply that it doesn't slide down as easily as it did before. So now let's take a look here. Again, the pile is high. If I run my fingers through, it's just really, really light and fluffy. A little bit of the fine dust sticks to my finger. Also notice, though, that there's a lot less of the pieces of the corn husk and stuff left. The husk of the individual kernels is being ground up finer and finer in this process. So now we'll go ahead and grind it a final time. Okay, this will be the third grind, and I'm going to try to tighten the burr down just a little more. But even if I didn't tighten it down, just running it through at the same setting would make it finer. Again, we don't want to go too fast with this. I think maybe 50 RPMs was probably a good hand crank speed. That certainly would give a person a good workout, I'll tell you. Okay, I was able to tighten that up even a little more, so I'm going to run that through with this slightly tighter setting for this third and final grind. Okay, so there's our third and final grind, and we see that the angle of repose here is pretty high. The big thing is that it's just super light and fluffy. This has still got the wheat germ, or the corn germ in it, you know, the growing part of the seed. I can feel a little warmth in there. You don't want to heat this up and cook the corn, but a big thing is that we don't see any of the hull around the edge here anymore. So we've ground it up fine enough that that's totally integrated into the flour. So this is the corn flour, not cornmeal. At least that's my own term, that we will use to make bakery goods with. In Europe, or in England, I guess, at any rate, corn flour, I guess, is what we would call corn starch. So this is the equivalent, in my mind, of wheat flour, because it's just the whole kernel ground up real fine. Okay, here our scones are ready to go in the oven. We followed the recipe that you saw a little bit ago, except we made one big change, which instead of using 2 cups of all-purpose bleach flour and 1 cup of stone ground yellow cornmeal, we used 2.5 cups of our own finely ground corn flour and 1/2 cup of unbleached, or a bleached wheat flour. And we went from 1 tablespoon of baking powder to 1.5 tablespoons of baking powder. And again, the cornmeal is this stuff right here, which I ground yesterday. So into the oven they go at 450 for 10 to 12 minutes. This is about 7 minutes into the cooking.
Okay, so there's no brown at this point, and what I can do is touch them and they're not done.
Okay, that's at 10 minutes. It's now 12 minutes.
They're not starting to brown. I think we're going to let them go at least another minute.
14 minutes.
They're still just starting to brown back there and there. I think they're going to take the 15 minutes. We'll just put them in for one more and then they're all just starting to brown a little bit. Here, here, here. That one's gotten pretty brown. This one around the edges, we don't want them to brown anymore.
Well, here's what they look like 15 minutes after they came out of the oven. Okay, honey, why don't you try one and see what you think?
They break nicely. You have to have butter on them. They're really quite nice. They're definitely cornmeal.
Okay. Well, they are corn, so.
Right. But they're very tasty, very nice.
So there's the consistency that we get. And this is whole grain cornmeal.
They're very tasty. Very nice.
Delicious. Now here we made a huge change in the formula, or in the recipe, by cutting down the wheat flour from 2/3 to 1/5.
1/6
wheat.
actually.
To 1/6, to 1/6 wheat flour, and they still taste just great. Again, the original formula, or the original recipe, called for 2 cups of bleached wheat flour and 1 cup of yellow cornmeal. So I think this is a very acceptable use of corn for scones.
And it's not near as gritty as regular cornmeal.
Okay.
That's very nice. It's the texture is better.
Great. And I'd want to remind you that many years ago we used to make our own bread, and we were using whole grain wheat. We weren't removing the germ from the wheat when we ground the whole
Right.
wheat.
It's healthier.
And that made a bread that was coarser than bleached white flour bread too. So
If you put a filling in it, you couldn't taste the filling because the bread was so good.
yep.
And this is sort of the same way. It's very corn. Very good though.
Delicious. So we're going to make some lemon cornmeal scones with dried blueberries instead of cherries, using the exact recipe that we got, which uses a little bit of cornmeal and a lot of bleached flour, so that we'll be able to compare scones made with a lot of corn flour, our own corn flour, with those made with mostly wheat flour. Okay, here are our scones, our lemon cornmeal scones with dried cherries, and this is made according to the original recipe, which uses 2 cups of all-purpose bleached flour and 1 cup of stone ground yellow cornmeal, but ours is finer than regular cornmeal that you buy in the store, and using exactly what the recipe calls for, which is 1 tablespoon of baking powder. And now into the oven they go.
You're wiggling a lot. Is that okay?
Here we are at about 12 minutes.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, there they are. These are the ones made with the regular recipe, which uses mostly wheat flour. Okay, here's the report. This is the difference between 1/3 cornmeal and 5/6 cornmeal. There's no doubt that the scone with the most wheat flour in it rose more. All right, that's pretty easy to see. And it's a little less crumbly and more chewy. Very pleasant. But this scone here is still very tasty too, and it's a little more crumbly for sure, but still very flavorful. Here I've cut one of the mostly corn scones and one of the mostly wheat flour scones apart, and you can kind of judge for yourself what the texture looks like from a rising standpoint. Again, this one, we took it out earlier too, and it gives a little. This one is more firm, and I'm not enough of a cook to tell you whether we should have taken this one out 2 minutes sooner. We probably left these in about 15 minutes, and these we took out right at 12. But they both certainly are nothing that you'd throw away. They're very tasty.
I hope you now realize that, just like ancient people did, we can pick corn out of the field, process it ourselves, then cook or bake it into delicious food fit for human beings.